well, so you mentioned unemployment. The Fed previously had disagreements with the Department of Labor, if I'm not wrong. So regarding the assessment of unemployment, so the Fed believed that the Department of Labor was improving indicators. So um, how was the situation? Because the Department of Labor says, as always, that everything is fine and the length of the working week in hours is being reduced. It was, if I'm not wrong, 34.4 in November. 34.5 hours were expected in December, but it turned out to be 34.3, a sign of an intensification of the crisis. And we can say that the uh, PMI indicates that are falling below 50.
Measure.
Mhm.
You also pointed out that, though, to the average work week, there are some modest signs that the labor market is weakening. And for example, the number of hours worked per week ticked down a very small amount. That is a sign of a slight softening in labor market conditions. That is true. In addition, wages, which have been very, very high, we track wages quite carefully.
Mhm.
The increases, they're still very high increases, but the increases have been declining a little bit. And that's a good thing because real, too high wage inflation causes price inflation. Our mandate is
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
price inflation, not wage inflation. And it's older
Mhm.
people in particular have dropped out of the labor force, have retired, and they don't want to come back because they don't want to take any risk on COVID. But the U.S. labor force has really shrunk
Mhm.
since COVID in a
Mhm.
way that's very surprising. And that's so we have a labor shortage in a way. We have a shortage of available workers, and that's part of what makes it hard to get inflation down. And but what we're going to find is that growth in 2022 was positive but modest. It was subdued. So 1% around that level. Um, in terms of this year, most forecasts call for the U.S. economy to continue to grow, but at a pretty subdued level. So growth of less than 1%, let's say. But we would tell you that a recession is almost as likely as very slow growth. Um, so that's a fact, and I think that is partly because of us having raised rates quite a bit. But this is what it takes to get inflation down. We to get inflation off of the high, we've had inflation at its highest level in 40 years. To get inflation to come down, what we need is a period of slower growth so that the economy can cool off, so the labor market can cool off, so that wages can cool off. And so that's how inflation comes down. That's the only way we know to bring inflation down. And it can be painful, but we don't know of any painless way
Mhm.
for inflation to come down.
And what kind of risk do you see for world economy now, and especially for the US? What is your assessment?
So when growth is very slow already, any kind of a shock, any kind of a negative event, whether it be problems with a new COVID strain
Mhm.
or some kind of terrible event in Ukraine that turn a turn
Mhm.
that we
Mhm.
don't want to see in Ukraine, something like that, some negative shock that could put the U.S. economy in recession. You ask for risks, it's the risks are clearly, what happens in Ukraine is really going to matter, and clearly what happens in China will matter. In the United States, I think we have a risk from this thing you're reading about the debt ceiling. There's going to be a big confrontation
Mhm.
in the next few months.